And let's see. Kevin, is it okay if I make you co-host in case I forget to add people?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. And let me set this to share screen. All right. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to TTLAB's 2023 seminar. As some of you know, we used to have this seminar on a monthly basis and, sort of present publications from that from the previous month. So we would typically have maybe two or three papers, or sometimes have uh, invited guests. We haven't had done that in a while. Since COVID, I guess we kind of stopped it. And so I wanted to um, restart it, and we're going to restart it from January. But I figured we had so many good publications this year. Let's do something with publications for this year. So we're going to cover all the publications done for 2023. Turns out to be a nice clean number, 24. Um, and for 15-minute talks, that comes out to be 6 hours. So we're going to have 2 3-hour slots, sessions, with an hour break, for lunch. During that hour, so after the first session, we'll have additional questions, etc. But I will stay online, and if people want to stay online and chat, uh, to catch up with one another, because I see a lot of people who we haven't seen in a while, a lot of people who've gone on and done other things. So from 12 to 1 during that time is when we'll have a break. But as I said, I'll keep the session open, or the Zoom session open. So if anybody wants to chat, then we'll start back at 1 and finish at 4 during that time. Okay, so before we start, let me kind of I know most of you here are familiar with TTLAB, but let me just kind of summarize, what we do, etc. So TTLAB is really an ad hoc group of researchers. Various people come to me interested in doing research and publishing, and as long as they have a suitable background and interest, and time, I collaborate with them, or help them come up with a project to work on. Um, and we have people from multiple disciplines, as you know, from engineering to computer science, mathematics, etc. Also people from various levels of education. We have undergrad students, postgrad students, PhD students. We have diaspora. We have people in industry, etc. So it's an interesting group of people. But people come in, they publish, and then they potentially move on to do other things like PhDs, or they have get a job and become too busy to continue research. Some do continue, but not all. So today we will be going over these 24 publications, and let me just kind of bring up the list of publications here. So here's a list of the publications. We won't go in this particular order. I kind of move things around because some people, based on their location, their time zone, I wanted to have them present at a reasonable time, etc. Um, One thing I want to talk about though is the fact that let me see here. I guess most of you may have heard me say all the time that the problem is not the problem. Sorry, the problem is not the solution. The problem is the problem itself. Um, so given a nice, well-defined problem, coming up with a solution is typically, straightforward. And so coming up with a good, well-defined problem that makes sense, is beneficial to somebody, um, and is not too difficult to solve is what is important. Uh, in industry, that wasn't too difficult because, in industry, you are told, well, you are provided with problems to solve and you solve them and potentially, file patents, publish, etc. as well. But in academia, it's a little bit difficult, and so we tend to come up with these more made up problems, and so what I try to do is instead, as you know, is come up with real problems, and they come from various places, and so let me just kind of give you an idea of where some of these came from, so you have an idea of where you could look for problems because they're not easy to find, as some of you know. Um, so this first one, and I won't go through all because of time, but the first one by Rishon, this is something we started a few years ago, about, we wanted to improve the rate of entry of cars into to UE using a license plate detection, etc. So we started that project, but then Rishon took that a bit further and added the concept of continual learning to that. And he'll talk more about that later on. And because that's part of his PhD research. And then the next one here is with Jamie Greasley on powder X-ray diffraction. So she came to me, and she had, this physics problem, and she wanted to apply some machine learning to it. And we collaborated on that, and came up with a nice journal paper on that. So that was something that was defined by Jamie, but coming out of physics. The third one really came about because we were doing some work for an insurance company. Um, and this insurance company wanted us to look at risk, but based on data science as opposed to actual science. And so we use their data to better determine risk, because the actual science approach uses tables that were developed, in other countries, etc. And it didn't, in some cases, may not reflect what is actually happening locally. So we use local data, determine risk, and then from risk, we determine pricing, etc. So we were able to do personalized pricing. And one issue that came up is how personalized can you make it? Um, given a customer, how specific can we make the price to that particular customer? And that depends on various factors, in particular, the number of samples we have. And because of Trinidad being so small, we didn't have that many samples to make it very specific, but there's a trade-off between how personalized we can make it and how robust we can do the prediction. And that's how I got into this whole robustness versus personalization trade-off, because I wanted to quantify that difference. So that problem started off from an insurance company, but then it grew into something, bigger with coming up in a regression approach, etc. And some of the later papers are actually are derived from this initial work. So so that's another real problem from in industry. And this is working with industry. And so the only way really to come up with good problems is, either from industry or from some sort of research lab. But, typically we do not have the resources to either generate or create local research labs in industry, etc. The fourth one, again, this comes from a local industry. We were doing some work for TSTT, and it involved pricing of cellular plans, subscription plans, and in particular prepaid plans. And they wanted us to, optimize pricing, blah, blah, blah. But we took it to a different level. We started looking at how pricing would be done when eSIMs are introduced. And eSIMs were not, this was before even Digicel or T-Mobile, B-Mobile introduced eSIMs. So we, thought that eSIMs would change how pricing should be done. And we did some work in that particular area. And we've expanded on that. And Ramnik will talk a little bit more about that. So that kind of gives you an idea of where problems come from industry, from students, and various. Some of these are based on some individual problems that I wanted to address, etc. Anyway, so that's how TTLAB operates. We try to find interesting problems. People come to us. We work with them to identify problems. They publish. Some, realize that the research is not for them. They go off and, and do other things. But others stick around and they publish. And so the ones listed as alumni are people who actually produce a publication as a first author. So once they produce a paper as a first author, I believe my work is done. They are now capable of independently working on a publication. So they can go off and do it on their own now. All right, so it's almost 9. So let's start the presentations. And the first presentation is by Kem. Kem is an MSc in data science student. She's actually presenting from St. Lucia. So as I said, we have people from various countries presenting today as well, because TTLAB people have moved on to other countries, or some actually come from other countries like Kem. So Kem, yeah, you can go ahead and share your screen and begin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, morning.
Morning.
Okay. This morning, I will be presenting on predicting students' academic performance and an analysis of the impact of the environment. Okay, so I wrote this paper. Sorry, I'm Kemi Manuel, who did an MSc in data science from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And I currently lecture at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. And I did this paper in collaboration with Professor Hossein, which you all know and love. So this problem came about because of the impact that our third key stage exam in St. Lucia, which is called C in Trinidad, the impact that it has on students moving forward. So I'm not sure if the system is the same in Trinidad. I think it is, but based on your third key stage exam, or C, then you are placed in a particular secondary school. But the truth is all secondary schools are not equal. You get better opportunities if you go to certain secondary schools, and it is really important for students to know exactly what secondary school they can attend based on the results of the past standardized exams that they did in primary school. So the research objectives was to explore the predictive value of the Key Stage Exam 1 and 2 on the Key Stage Exam 3. So that's two standardized exams before the exit assessment. Investigate the impacts of environmental changes on students' grades, which we'll look at a little later, and enhance academic outcomes and develop remedial strategies. So our data was sourced from the Government of St. Lucia, the Ministry of Education, sorry. And basically what they gave us was the student's name and the examination grades for each stage. So Key Stage Exam 1, 2, and 3. From that, we derived all the data points. For example, whether the students went to a combined school, which is when the infant and primary school is together, or whether the students went to the infant separate from the primary school. We also gathered whether student exchange were transferred, sorry. So they started off in one school and they ended, or they wrote the C exam in another. I'll use C for this presentation, sorry about that. Just so it could be more relatable. So the first thing we looked at was correlations. And what we realized that there was a significant relationship between the three exams, and it was a positive relationship. So we know that correlation does not mean causation. So the next thing we did was actually, sorry about that. This is the heat map showing the correlation. So Key Stage Exam 1 had a 0.78 correlation to Key Stage Exam 3 and Key Stage Exam 2, 0.9. So then we looked at various regressors and we compared them in square error. Random Forest had an MSC of 39, which was one of the best we got. Due to, I'm guessing because the data set was kind of small. We had data for the last 5 years, but St. Lucia is a very small country, so we didn't have enough data to utilize a more robust approach. So when we got this predictive performance, we said, okay, yes, it is indeed a predictor. And then we looked at various factors that could affect the prediction of data. So the first one would be the impact of environmental changes, that being when students transferred from one school to another. So the first heat map shows students who were not transferred, so they stayed in one school from kindergarten to grade 5, I believe, grade 4, which is it's standard 4, which is grade 6. Sorry about that. And as you can see, the students who did not transfer actually did way better. The correlation results were way better than the students who transferred. We also looked at the school model. So again, in St. Lucia, we have 2 school models. We have the infant primary school model, where these schools are separate, sometimes in separate environments, sometimes they're in the same, well, close proximity, not the same environment. And we also have combined schools. So the heat map on the left shows the individuals who attended combined schools, and the heat map on the right shows the students who attended the infant primary model. As you can see, the correlation is more or less similar, the same. When we did the regression analysis, we realized that the students who did not transfer, MSc was 42, and the students who attended a combined school, the MSc was 49. However, when you look at these two together, the MSc dropped to 22.5. And the students who changed, so the students who transferred, the MSc was 63, combined school, the MSc was 42, which was actually, who did not attend combined school, sorry, just 42, which is less than the students who attended combined school. However, together, the MSc was 45.2. So we realized that there is a significant disparity in academic performance linked to the changes in the student educational environment. It was significant, and the transfers and changes in the school model actually affected the prediction accuracy negatively. We also looked at public versus private primary school academic performance, or this should be private. In St. Lucia, we have this opinion that private schools actually do better than public schools, and private schools are schools which the parents fund, while public schools are schools funded by the government. And on the left, we have the correlation of the students who attended public schools, and the right, the correlation with of the students who attended private schools. And again, there is a difference, but I don't believe it's notable. And when we ran the regression analysis, the MSc was 42 for the students who attended public school and 45 for the students who attended private school. Now, I must put in a disclaimer. Again, we got results for 5 years. So the disparity in the number of records we have for age was significant. So when we looked at the p-value, we realized that the results didn't indicate school type, indicated that school type does not really significantly impact academic performance. Now, this is something we can look at for a longer period of time, so we could get more data on. But with the data at hand, we realized that it didn't really have a significant, the school type did not have a significant impact on academic performance. So in conclusion, key stage exams 1 and 2 are strong predictors of key stage exam 3. Changing environments negatively impacted prediction accuracy, and there was no significant difference in the prediction based on school type. Practical implications for early interventions and this study brought about practical implications for early interventions and personalized strategies. And further research can be done in basically developing targeted interventions based on identified predictors, exploring socioeconomic factors, parental involvement, and individual learning styles, and leveraging learning analytics and data mining techniques could provide real-time insights into students' learning behaviors and performance. And this is about it for this presentation. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
So thanks, Kim. Oh, but by the way, so Kim was able to present this at a conference in Morocco recently. So she did us proudly at that conference. One thing I want to point out is what we also try to do in addition to solving problems, we like to show how those solutions could be actually used in practice. So decision making, which is one of the things Kim did. So any questions for Kim? I know she has to drop off because of she has to attend something at her school.
Yeah, we have one question in the comments there.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, you wanna
from
read it.
from Safia Kem. What's the timeline for the other key stage exams 1 and 2, and how much before exam 3 is written?
Okay, so key stage exam 1. Now I am not sure what they call the classes in Trinidad. I was trying to remember. I think there are standards, right? So you have
Yes.
stage 1, stage 2.
Yeah,
Standard
so
1.
there's standard 1 to 5, which I think is from 7 to 11 or 12 or something, somewhere. Wait, Mercedes might be able to answer that better, maybe.
Okay, so the first key stage exam 1 is done when a child is 7. The second key stage exam is done when a child is 9. And the third one is done when a student, is 11. Yes, just like the
Okay.
national test that you have.
I didn't even know we had a national test. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Cam? All right. So thanks, Cam, and I'll let you just do your little hand clapping on your screen instead of a physical hand clapping for Cam. So thanks, Cam, and thanks for showing up. I know you have a busy day today, so thanks for taking the time to show up and enjoy your day in St. Lucia.
Thank you. All the best, everyone.
Thanks. So next is Ramneek. Ramneek is presenting from South Korea, so which is late for her. So she has 3 papers to present, so she will do all 3 consecutively. So she has, she'll take about 50 minutes each, and then we'll ask her questions because she has to drop off due to time. So yeah, go ahead, Ramneek.
Okay, so is my screen visible?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Ramni. So currently I'm working as a research professor at Mobile Networks and Communication Lab at Korea University. So my research is primarily focused around radio resource management, QoS provisioning and pricing for advanced cellular networks. So I met Dr. Patrick back in 2013 when he actually supervised my master's project, and we have been working together since then. And we have written like over 20 papers and a patent together. So I really feel fortunate to have him as my mentor. And also I feel very honored to be a part of TTLAB, and it is very, very amazing to see how it has grown over the years. So So as Professor Patrick mentioned, so today I'll be presenting 3 of our papers that were published this year. So this is the first one. Okay, so this paper was published in IEEE Communication Magazine's special issue on the evolution of telecom business economy, policies and regulations in July. So in this paper, we outlined the disruptive effects of embedded SIMs on pricing and business models, and we discussed several challenges and opportunities that will arise with its adoption. So this is the overview. Okay. So what is an embedded SIM? So embedded SIM is form of a programmable SIM card that is embedded directly onto the device. So instead of an integrated circuit, which is located on a removable UICC card, typically made of PVC, like we traditionally had, the eSIM consists of a software which is installed directly onto the embedded UICC chip, which is permanently attached to the device. So once the eSIM carrier profile has been installed on the EUICC, it operates the same way as a physical SIM does. The eSIM standard was first released in 2016. And since that point, eSIM has begun to replace the physical SIM card in various domains, such as the consumer devices and IoT devices and so on. So the adoption of eSIMs is growing rapidly, with consumer-facing products such as mobile phones and wearables leading the way, followed by the automobiles and smart meters. So it has been predicted that the total number of eSIM smartphone connections will increase up to 2.4 billion by 2025. And by 2030, the eSIMs will replace the physical SIM cards. So, this figure shows the overview of how the eSIMs works in comparison to the physical SIM cards. So unlike the physical SIM cards, where the users are required to acquire the card from the new operator and physically swap the card to connect it to a new network, the eSIMs allow the users to download multiple operator profiles, and they can flexibly switch between them through the mobile device. So in case of eSIMs, the provisioning of service is over the air, and the MNO or the virtual network operator's profile can be downloaded based on user's location and requirements. And the profile basically consists of the operator's credentials, subscription related data, and SIM-based applications. So after setting up the contract with the desired operator, a user can activate the eSIM service using various methods, such as using a QR codes or manual activation codes and so on. And then they can connect their device to the remote SIM provisioning system of that particular operator. So unlike the physical SIM cards where we had to like physically replace it, in this case we can just on the go we can switch between different operators. So the unlike the traditional ecosystem where we had the network operators providing the service, the eSIM ecosystem, it is inherently very complex because it comprises of multiple stakeholders from the enablement to the management stages. So we have consumers, network operators, virtual network operators, equipment managers, SIM vendors, content providers, and finally the regulatory authorities, each of which have their own roles to play in the complete service provisioning cycle. And while the network operators will still play a pivotal role, there are a number of other players that will seek to exploit the new market dynamics that are introduced with the eSIM. So this table basically summarizes the opportunities and challenges for different players. And particularly for the consumers, it allows simplified subscription management and seamless switching, and also multi-device capability. And for the network operators, it offers new revenue channels via multi-device connectivity. And also it offers the wholesale opportunities, and there is a reduced overall operational cost. So currently, most of the network operators, they offer similar plans for both the SIMs and eSIMs. However, owing to the differences in service provisioning and changing market dynamics and increased competition, this may need to change in future. So to harness the opportunities and innovations which are enabled by advanced networks such as 5G and 6G and the eSIMs, the mobile data pricing strategies should be designed carefully. So as eSIMs allows the user to simultaneously subscribe to multiple network providers, this allows them to switch the operators flexibly. And this in turn implies that in addition to the traditional churn where the consumers were switching between between different network operators, we also have to consider the soft churn where they dynamically switch among multiple plans from multiple operators. So now this soft churn also has to be taken into consideration. And the soft churn can be triggered by several factors such as short-term promotions, network coverage, network quality, pricing strategies, technology, advertising, and so on. So the network operators and virtual network operators, they should offer appropriate service quality. And in addition, they should adopt optimal pricing strategies that are dynamic and flexible. So in the case of eSIMs, its impact is expected to be higher in case of the prepaid customers. So than in the markets with the postpaid customers. So for instance, in developing countries with predominantly the prepaid customers, several customers, they purchase SIM cards from multiple operators. And then since they are not contractually bound to the operator, they may discontinue the service without prior notice, which in turn presents a unique challenge for the operators. And since eSIMs make this switching easier, it further increases the probability of churn, intensifying the competition. And then coming to the static versus dynamic pricing. So traditionally, the operators are offering static pricing mechanisms and their variations. However, with this increased competition and increased probability of churn, dynamic and flexible pricing strategies need to be adopted in the near future. And with eSIM, several new pricing trends have emerged, such as wholesale service provisioning, shared data plans, where a single user could acquire multiple eSIMs for different devices, and then they could be linked to a particular plan. Then we have global roaming tariffs. So unlike traditionally where we had to buy a SIM card when traveling to say another country, we could now just download the eSIM profile for the foreign operator when we are there and start using the services. And then there are promotional pricing and try and buy pricing as well. So a lot of new pricing plans have been emerging. So to address the issue of customer churn, as I mentioned, while staying competitive in this eSIM ecosystem, in this paper, we propose the use of personalized pricing. So personalized pricing is basically a strategy in which unique plans and prices are determined for each user based on their specific needs and characteristics. So personalized pricing benefits the customers because they are only paying for the resources they require. And in turn, it also benefits the operators since from the price elasticity perspective, they will typically operate at near optimal pricing point. So in the current prepaid ecosystem with the traditional SIM cards, switching between operators is not straightforward. So it's very difficult for the users to actually differentiate between the different plans, such as the low profitability plans, where the operators are basically trying to attract more customers, or high profitability plans where they are trying to increase their revenue. And since they can only use one plan at a time, they cannot leverage the flexibility of using the right plan at the right time. However, with eSIMs, manual switching is no longer required. So the process of optimization, that is choosing the best plan at any given point of time, and then switching can easily be automated. So consequently, the operators, they are obliged to offer inventive pricing mechanisms such as personalized pricing because they have no choice but to offer optimal pricing strategies to stay competitive. So, looking at the traditional pricing, fixed or traditional pricing mechanisms, So if a user purchases a certain level of quality for certain number of bytes of data over a given period of time, then the cost of providing such a plan is a function of Q, D, and T. And these are non-decreasing functions because the price would increase with increase in the QoS level, increase in the data limit or the time limit. And the cost grows with each of these factors. So over the duration of this plan, if the actual usage is denoted by, say, Q bar, D bar, and T bar, which means that the actual, for example, Q bar less than Q signifies that the quality of service required may be low, actual quality of service may be lower in case of congestion periods. And then if we have D bar less than D, it means that it can be lower than the actual data allowance if user runs out of the time before running out of data. And finally, if T bar is less than T, it just means that user runs out of the data before running out of time. So what we want to emphasize over here is the actual requirements may not be equal to what is offered by the fixed pricing plans. So instead, we propose the use of personalized pricing approach where the actual cost of providing the services to the customer is used to determine the price. And that is done based on the actual values of Q bar, D bar, and T bar. They are estimated based on the historical usage of the customer. So in case of personalized pricing, so the price of a plan, it should reflect the cost of the resources that are to be provided as well as the desired profit margin. So in a given competitive environment, it is important to choose the appropriate value of the profit margin. And if we assume that we know the optimal value of the profit margin, then price charged by the traditional provider in this case would be given by this expression. However, in case of personalized pricing, it would be based on the actual requirements of the user. So here, the figure on the left-hand side, in this case, we try to vary the price as a function of the service cost, assuming that both the traditional and the personalized providers, they use the same profit margin. So in this case, setting high prices by the traditional provider can lead to increased churn and hence decreased revenue. On the other hand, if the traditional provider offers the same price but lowers the profit margin in order to stay competitive, then its overall revenue will still decrease. And then on the right-hand side, we maintain the same price for both the operators. And then we plotted the profit margin versus the service cost. And in this case, we find that at a certain threshold, the profit margin drops to zero. That is, for any service cost below this threshold, price can no longer be maintained, which results in a zero customer profit for the traditional provider. So in both the cases, personalized pricing is beneficial for both the customer as well as the operators. And further, since the personalized pricing is customized based on users' requirement, the marketing requirements of product differentiation and enhanced customer experience, as well as social and psychological, all those factors are implicitly taken into consideration. Okay, so in the previous slide, we illustrated the development of the optimized customer specific plan or the personalized plan. However, since such plans are not presently available, therefore, we also illustrated a process for finding the best available plan for the customer. So in this case, we assume that we have the access to customers' historical data and the plans that are available from all the operators in the given location of the customer and their costs, which are represented by C of I for Q, D, and T of I for a given plan I. So the objective over here is to find the plan with the lowest cost for the resources which are required by the user. So for a given plan I, the utility provided by this plan to the user can be obtained from the plan quality QI times the maximum number of transferred bits. So therefore, the lowest cost can be given by this expression. And so in this case, this approach depends on the availability of sufficient historical usage of the customer. Since users may potentially switch plans depending on their needs and budgets, this kind of estimation is not straightforward. And in that case, machine learning based techniques can be employed to provide better recommendations. So in this case, the users for which we have so we can use the collaborative filtering or content based filtering depending on whether we have the historical usage for the data, and if we don't have, then we look for the trends from the similar users, and we can recommend a plan. So in this paper, we basically examined various factors that will affect the pricing of eSIM-based services. And we discussed the roles that will be played by different players in shaping the future of the mobile ecosystem. And in addition, we presented personalized pricing-based solutions to optimize the overall social welfare. And in future, more disruptive eSIM scenarios could arise from wider adoption of the eSIM technologies. And further, alternate technologies such as iSIM or the virtual SIM could also be used by large number of users. So new inventive mobile tariffs should be designed, and they will be very crucial to further spur the adoption of eSIM services. So this is the end of the presentation one. So should we take questions side by side, or should we take them at the end after all the three presentations?
Well, we could take questions after each, so that
okay, sure.
people. Yes. Yes, Torian, it is recorded. So any questions for this first paper? All right, I just wanted to point out one thing: the fact that this work on eSIMs, etc., and pricing, etc., actually started off through work we did with TSTT. So TSTT hired us, as in, hired 5 interns, and one of them was working on this. Gabrielle was working on this, and it just shows that you could take a simple pricing problem from a company, and then expand it into a wide range of areas. So Ramneek took it from there, and got it into IEEE Communications Magazine paper, etc. So yeah, there are nuggets of interesting problems all over. It's just to find it and find ways to explore them. All right, so if let me just check one more time. Any questions on this first paper before we move on?
Hi, Prof. Not a question, but more like a comment. Ramnik, I really like this paper for me being an end user. I know this work started 3 years ago, but I think that a lot of it is still applicable now. So for me, I use eSIMs a lot when I travel, and I think it's a better I right now I don't like the current pricing policy still, because if I it's not personalized for the most part, and but it's a better option than roaming, than what's available locally by B-Mobile or Digicel. So I would be interested to see the trend of eSIM and the effect of the pricing policy on roaming packages in the future. But yeah, I just want to say great job, because this is something I hope to see a lot of companies adopt in the future. One issue that I have currently is that if you travel for a short time, but you use a high amount of data, that's not like a package that's offered. And there's still some manual switching of the networks, even though it may be automated. Your phone may select an option that has a low coverage. And as you mentioned in your talk earlier, it's not straightforward to do that manual switch.
Thank you so much for your comment, and it's really good to see that you could practically relate to what we are trying to solve. And our ultimate goal with this work is that we wanted to develop an application which could recommend the best possible plan for the user at any given point of time or location. So if we have like information about your usage trend, like in terms of how much data you generally use or what is the quality level that you are expecting, then what we would love to do as an extension of this work is to recommend the plan from the plans could belong to different operators, but recommend the plan that would be best for you, so that you don't have to like manually uh, search for the suitable plan.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, so it's not straightforward, but that is our ultimate goal.
Yeah, we started off, getting some developers in India to do it for us, but it didn't turn out. And well, Ramni could talk about this. I mean, in Trinidad, we just have two providers, but in a place like India, potentially you could have what, 4 or 5 providers
Yeah,
to compete. Yeah.
yes. So it's going to be a very interesting problem, like a valuable problem in the future.
Oh, and one thing you could mention, Ramnik, is with
Yes.
MVNOs, you have even more options, right? Because it's no longer just the
Yes.
physical. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And yeah, there are like right from when we started researching for this paper, like doing the literature research, and now that I recently searched through the internet again, there is a considerable increase in number of MVNOs coming up. So yeah, so and then when the virtual network operators, when they come into play, so there are different set of challenges. So, but from the user's point of view, as you said, that traditionally, like we have like 2, 3, 4 popular providers at max, but now it'll be like a different story altogether.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Ramnik. Maybe you could go on to the next
Yeah.
one. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so this is the second paper that I'll be presenting. So it was published in ICDCS 2023. So this is the overview. Okay. Okay, so as we know, the 5G networks, they were designed to be multi-service networks that have the ability to not only provide enhanced mobile broadband as compared to the 3G and 4G networks, but also support different service verticals such as ultra reliable low latency communication, massive machine type communication, and so on. So network slicing has been identified as a key technology for enabling these services over a shared infrastructure. And network slicing enables dynamic and scalable allocation of customized resources through network virtualization. So it enables the network operators to basically create slices of networks, and those slices comprise of the radio, compute, and storage resources, and so on. And these slices then can be granted to the tenants to enable different vertical services over logically independent virtual networks. So the network resources can either be allocated exclusively to a single slice, or they can be shared among multiple slices, which results in increased network efficiency. So the optimal utilization of shared network resources is very crucial aspect for inter-slice orchestration and management. And this must be achieved dynamically to satisfy the constraints that are imposed by the service requests. So in particular, we require advanced solutions for predicting the load on the slices in order to implement efficient admission control, congestion control, load balancing, and other resource allocation mechanisms. And to address these issues, several optimization techniques have been proposed in the literature, such as those based on game theory, heuristics, machine learning approaches, and so on, have been applied to make the decisions for the operator, given the service requirements and the resource availability. However, such kind of techniques, they are focused on the static deployments, and generally they overlook the demands for dynamic deployment and slice expansion. Further, the existing techniques for load monitoring for network slices, they are generally based on parameters such as resource utilization, and such a kind of parameters, parameter-based load monitoring, it lacks precision, especially in case of heterogeneous services. And the failure to reproduce these kind of nonlinear load trends, such as erratic variations in case of like the networks, they make these kind of mechanisms very unsuitable for the real world scenarios. And in case of machine learning techniques, the performance for predicting the future demand by monitoring the past slice behaviors, they may be highly dependent on the initialization of different models. So to address these issues, we in this paper, we proposed load detection mechanism, and we illustrated briefly how it can be used for admission control and dynamic slice resizing. So we considered a 5G network with network slicing and proposed a novel approach for monitoring the load on each slice. And then we illustrated how it will be leveraged for admission control, load balancing, and slice capacity resizing. And finally, the proposed metric, it is used to determine when the load is approaching the capacity. So at that point, new request should either be blocked, or the QoS requirements of new or existing requests based on their priority should be renegotiated. And the proposed approach accurately determines the load irrespective of the traffic pattern or type of the application and its QoS requirements. So if we consider an existing connection with the QoS constraints, say on minimum throughput, maximum delay, maximum packet loss rate, etc. So we can have these constraints on multiple parameters. So if any of these are violated, then that particular connection's QoS requirements are not met. So to guarantee the quality of service, we define the barrier functions for each of these constraints, which are the nonlinear functions that increase as the measured value approaches the limit. So basically, we are trying to restrict the movement outside the feasible region. So we first illustrate how the load is measured for a single slice. So in this case, to guarantee the quality of service, as I mentioned, we define the barrier functions, and each of these functions are chosen to be convex, and hence the sum of all those functions over all the constraints is also convex. So we denote this function by f of q bar, and q bar here represents the vector of constraints. So it must be noted that in this case, even the non-radio constraints such as the compute and memory resources could also be included, because we are talking about the network slices. So the resources are not only the network resources, but compute and storage and other resources as well. So as more resources are allocated to a particular request, one or more constraints will move away from the threshold, which will cause reduction in the value of this function. And hence, one can show that if the resources are optimally allocated, then the gradient of this function with respect to the resource, that particular resource, will be same for each of the connections. And in addition, the gradient will increase as the load increases. That is, as the resources become depleted, the constraint values will approach their threshold. So each of the barrier functions will increase. And then the average of this gradient across all the connections in the particular slice is taken to be the load on that slice. And then this particular metric can be continuously monitored and used in the cross-slice resource orchestration. So as an example, if we consider a throughput-based constraint Rmin, then in this case, the function can be defined in terms of the throughput, and it can be expressed by this expression. And here, this constant beta is can be determined based on the priority of that particular connection. And when the resources are optimally allocated, the steady state gradients for each of the connections will converge. And we have this. So this basically means that the gradient increases with the loading. And so we use the average of this quantity over all the connections as our instantaneous load. And in this case, we only consider the throughput constraint. But if we have multiple constraints, then the overall objective function can be just be the sum of all those constraints. Once we have a metric for monitoring the load on the slice, then we can leverage that to actually perform the slice load balancing and admission control. So based on the estimated load, the cross-slice resource orchestration can be done. So for a given request, we first find the slice with the minimum load. If the required resources are less than the capacity, then that particular request can be granted. Else, we predict the load change if resource request is actually allocated, and then resize the slices so that that particular request can be fulfilled without affecting the existing requests. And if that is not possible, then the service request has to be renegotiated. And if that is not possible, then it will be rejected. And then this decision is forwarded to the resource controller for actually instantiating these slices through physical resource allocation. So this was just a short paper presented as a poster. So we didn't have any kind of simulation results for this one, but just the idea. So basically, we introduced a new load metric that can be used across the slices. And we illustrated how it can be used for load balancing, capacity resizing, and so on. And the proposed method, it works irrespective of the application type. And as a part of the future work, we are interested in using machine learning based methods to predict firstly the effect on the load of a slice when we add a new service request. So in that case, we could predict what the effect of allocation of a particular request will have on the existing requests in the slice, so we can make more informed decisions for the resource allocation. And secondly, the effect of network resizing on the existing requests in the slice. So that's the end of the second presentation. So if you have any questions, please.
Yeah. Any questions for Ramneek on this? I know this is on a slightly different area than most of you are working in. It's more on communications, networking stuff. But it is some interesting work. And if any of you ever decide you want to delve into some of this, let me know. But the work Ramneek is doing on slicing and congestion control, etc., is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, like if anyone is particularly we would need help with the machine learning part. So if anyone is interested in collaborating, it will be great.
Yeah, machine learning, as well as development of that app we talked about earlier.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So no questions? Okay, Ramneek, you could go on to your final talk. Sure. Thanks.
Okay, so this is the third and the final paper that I'll be presenting today. And this was presented at AP Norms 2023, which was held in Korea this year. Okay. So as we discussed in the first presentations, the eSIMs have recently become very popular and their adoption is accelerating at an exponential rate. Due to the flexibility they offer. So as a result, a variety of data plans are currently being offered by the network operators as well as the virtual network operators. So as the eSIM technology continues to grow, there has been a significant increase in the number of mobile virtual network operators who are adopting this innovation to offer flexible services to the customers. So what are mobile virtual network operators? So mobile virtual network operators are the operators who do not actually own the network infrastructure, but they lease the network capacity from one or more network operators for offering a portfolio of services for its subscribers. So there are different types of MVNOs, including the reseller MVNOs that purchase the network capacity at a wholesale rate, and then they resell it under their own brand. And then there are service provider MVNOs that focus on differentiated services for specific markets, such as for global roaming and so on. So they target the niche markets. So MVNOs employ a diverse set of business models to adapt to customer segments and create some value added offerings. So some of these models include retail minus, cost plus, narrow focus, which is basically catering to niche markets, and international clustering, where they partner with international MVNOs and so on. So while these models might have worked well in traditional scenarios, but as the competition is increasing with the adoption of eSIMs, there are unique challenges that need to be addressed. And some of them, I'll discuss some of them. So firstly, the virtual network operators, they face the challenge of differentiating their services in such a competitive market. So they must develop some kind of unique value propositions and compelling offers to actually attract and retain customers. Secondly, the level of technological autonomy and the wholesale pricing agreements that they have with the actual network operators, those could significantly influence their ability to differentiate their services from the host MNOs or compete with them. And then lastly, the virtual operators, they need to adopt secure and scalable solutions for offering eSIM-based services and dynamically switching between different operator profiles. So, hence, although the MVNOs have a small customer base as compared to the network operators, they should enhance their operational and business support systems to compete with those operators and mitigate the risk of churn. And to address these challenges, in this paper, we propose a secure and scalable eSIM service provisioning frameworks for the virtual network operators. So the QS privacy and scalability requirements for offering these services and charging, they are fulfilled by leveraging the DAG or directed acyclic graphs for recording the MVNO, MNO, as well as the MVNO customer transactions, as well as microtransactions for pricing of the network resources. And on top of that, we propose the use of reverse sealed bid auctions, where the virtual operators, they select the best pricing plans for the customers based on the bids that are offered by different network operators that the MVNO has wholesale contracts with. So this allows the virtual operators to mitigate churn and stay competitive while also optimizing their profitability. So we consider a wholesale pricing scenario where a virtual operator, it leases network resources from multiple network operators, and then it offers network services to the customers. And we in this case, we assume that the virtual operators, it will list various plans from different operators without disclosing which operator is offering what plan. So the customer can specify its requirements in terms of required quality of service and amount of data and its budget. And then based on users' preferences, various network operators can bid to provide the required resources at a certain price using the sealed bid auctions. And then the best plan is chosen by the virtual operator based on the lowest bid and the MNO's reputation, and the network operator's reputation is calculated based on the historical information related to its offered prices as well as the achieved quality of service, which means that how closely the network operator could satisfy the QoS requirements for the users in the past. So the customer is then served based on the chosen MNO for the given time period T, and then this process is repeated. And it must be noted here that the eSIMs allow flexible service provisioning. So the virtual network operator can flexibly switch providers for the users based on best offer at any given time. And all the transactions for the service provisioning and microtransactions for pricing and network pricing the services between MVNOs and the customers, and also the transactions for interaction between MVNOs and MNOs, they are implemented using the directed acyclic graphs. So in this case, we propose the use of IOTA for secure and efficient eSIM service provisioning. So each player, that is the virtual operator, the network operator, and the customer, they are treated as nodes and they are assigned a unique digital identity. And then the transaction between different nodes for bidding, MNO assignment, network resource allocation, as well as for charging, they are recorded on the Tangle data structure of the IOTA. So in contrast to the conventional blockchains, the IOTA, it doesn't rely on the miners. Instead, any given transaction issued must obtain approval from a minimum of 2 previous transactions before it can be incorporated. So it forming a directed acyclic graph structure. So that is what we illustrate in the first algorithm about how the transaction is recorded on the DAG. So it is better than the blockchain because it allows cost-free, scalable value transfer. And that is important, especially when we are talking about the microtransactions for pricing these such services where the user might switch between these services at a smaller time frame. So further, the proposed framework combines IOTA with a reverse seal bid pricing and resource allocation method, as I just explained. So the MVNO, as I said, will offer a selection of pricing plans without revealing the MNOs. And based on the QoS requirements and the data requirements, the customers will be auctioned by various MNOs that the virtual operator has leased with. And then based on the submitted bids, the minimum price bid is chosen. And these bids are the sealed bids, and this helps to prevent strategic bidding based on the knowledge of other bids. So further, the use of DAG, which is the decentralized platform, it ensures that we have high confidentiality and integrity of the bids. And the dynamic seal bid reverse auction mechanism, so it is illustrated in this algorithm. And this is how it works. And then to prove the truthfulness of the auction mechanism, we did that using the reverse auction game, and we analyzed the Nash equilibrium for the reverse auction game. So in this case, for a given game, the Nash equilibrium occurs when no player has an incentive to unilaterally deviate from its chosen strategy. So based on the previous algorithm 2, in the reverse auction game, Nash equilibrium is reached when each operator bids their true valuation, and the virtual operator assigns the plans or tariffs to the user based on the lowest bids. So to prove that, if we consider a set of bids submitted by different operators, where BI is the bid submitted by operator I, and let's assume that W is the winning bid selected by the virtual operator. So in the first case, if a given operator I tries to deviate from their true valuation V of I and submits a bid equal to the V of I, then there are two possibilities. If the submitted bid is greater than the winning bid, then the operator would not win because win the auction because that is not the minimum value, so it will receive a payoff of 0. And in case its value is less than the winning bid, then the operator I would win the auction but receive a lower payoff than the bidding value. So the best strategy for it is to present its true valuation. And then in the second case, if the operator bids their true valuation, their bid will be selected as the winning bid if their valuation is less than W. So since each network operator's payoff is maximized by bidding their true value, and any deviation would result in a lower payoff, as we saw in case 1, no network operator has any kind of incentive to deviate from bidding their true valuation, which means that bidding the true value is a Nash equilibrium for all the operators. So this proves that the proposed reverse auction mechanism ensures the truthfulness of the bidding that is done by the operators for offering their services. So in this case, this paper basically has two main contributions. First is we try to leverage the use of directed acyclic graphs, which unlike the traditional blockchains where there are no miners, and thus any issued transaction must be approved by only 2 previous transactions. Consequently, we have lower latency and computational overheads related to the mining process. And then we propose the IOTA with the game theoretic method for efficient pricing and resource allocation. And for the future work, we plan to explore the case of multiple MVNOs. Like how would that work in a dynamic scenario, as well as simulate different use cases to evaluate other aspects of this approach. And also we would be interested in exploring the deep learning based auction mechanisms to optimize this framework, such as for the bidders behavior prediction and so on. So that's the end of the third presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, any questions for Ramnik? I know this was intense. It's a lot to follow,
Yes.
but any particular questions? One thing I want to point out is the variety of disciplines involved in this kind of work. There's mathematics involved, game theory, auctioning, etc. There's optimization involved with congestion controls, etc. There's of course communications involved. There's computer science involved with blockchain. So what I try to encourage students to do is, try to, move out of your specific discipline and see what other disciplines could be useful for your work as well, as we saw here. Okay, so if there are no more questions, again, I'll let you applaud virtually. Thanks, Ramnik. I know it's very late for you. So feel free to stick around, but I know, if you have to drop off, that's fine because it's late. So thanks again. So much. Yeah, yes. So thanks for showing up. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next presentation. The next presentation is also from somebody who is presented from abroad. Rishon will present. He'll introduce himself, but he's presently in Italy. So all yours, Rishon.
Thanks. All right. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Cool. Thanks. So yeah, my name is Rishon. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Pisa. And before this, I was a member of TTLAB for a couple of years. So it's very nice to see and hear some familiar faces and voices after so long. And this paper I'm presenting is based on the merge or kind of transition between the last thing I was a part of in TTLAB with Rajiv Ratan and Shiva Ramudith, if you know them, and some of the first things I worked on during the PhD. It was published in VISAP, which is a computer vision conference that was held back in February in Lisbon. So very brief on the agenda. First, we'll go over the motivation and the background of the problem, then the method we attempted to answer the questions we were concerned with, along with the results and the derived conclusions. So for some background on how we got to the problem the paper is based on, very generally, a big part of the research focus for my PhD is on the practical use of trying to help predictive models adapt to changes in their input. So early on, some important questions for that would be, how much do these kinds of changes affect stable solutions in real use, in real applications? And then what do we gain or lose by trying continual learning or incremental learning methods to adapt to those changes? So just to elaborate a bit more on what that means, when we train a model, we use data that we think best represents the input it would see in real use. But that estimation of reality doesn't always hold up, or it doesn't hold up forever. So if the task remains the same, the classes or what we're predicting remains the same, but the input or the domain space of the problem is changing, then that's called a domain incremental scenario, where the model is effectively being faced with things it wasn't really trained for. So to handle this, you could update your training data, help it once again best represent your real use input, and then, retrain it as if you're starting over again. But the problem is, retraining like that isn't always an easy choice. Because, for example, you might have your solutions deployed on the edge or being used on low power devices in environments with limited connectivity. So the cost in terms of convenience and time for retraining and redeploying is higher, and it needs to be paid by someone, whether it's the firm who promised to maintain that product or a company, like a manufacturing company, that now needs to hire or assign someone to fix it because it's not really within the normal day-to-day of issues. But if we can incrementally improve our models to suit their environments, that could help make things easier. So the end goal or the ideal situation is to be able to give someone your model to use and say, okay, your situation is kind of weird compared to past stuff. So it's going to be like 60% accurate now, but keep doing your thing, keep adding data, and it will improve over time. And that's also an easier product to sell. So that's the point of these two questions. And we went about trying to get at least the starting point for answers to them by identifying a commonly used or already solved problem that could see unexpected variation in its usage and testing incremental learning approaches on that solution in order to compare it to regular full training and get an idea of the differences. And there is existing work showing the benefits of incremental learning in these kinds of scenarios, on-edge scenarios, that is. So it shows that it can help adapt models while using less memory and power, which in turn makes it convenient and cheaper to remain useful over its lifetime. And now at the time of this work, which is like a year or two ago, there wasn't so much existing work on applications or more niche, realistic cases using these types of methods. So the reviews show it could be useful, but the application work proving it wasn't so much. And at the time, there was also nothing at all looking at it in the context of domain incremental object detection. So we decided to explore our two questions using the license plate recognition project, which is previous TTLAB work as the basis. So using the edge-focused model, the data set we created from that, and the setup of the project. And by the way, all of this was supported by the NVIDIA hardware grant program for that TTLAB project. So the data set from that project consisted of 1,200 Trinidad license plates with bounding boxes labeled. So we manually grouped those into 3 categories based on their difficulty for a detection model. The first is the easiest. It's high quality, up close images. So imagine the license plate detection system deployed on a security gate. That's that kind of data. The second would be low quality and blurry images, like if it was deployed using a CCTV camera above a street, for instance. And the third, or the most difficult, would be images that are distant and unisolated, like if you deployed it with a CCTV camera above a car park instead. So these categories allow us to simulate the change the model would experience as it goes to new environments. So it's the same product, same types of classification, but different deployment scenarios, so different uses of the product. As for the method, the libraries and implementations that make it easier to use continual learning methods are still relatively young. So at the time, there was really no consideration for object detection tasks. So for our method, we chose a strong, simple baseline method in this space and adapted it in order to get these experimental situations that could help us start to answer our questions. And that benchmark method we chose was GDUM. And GDUM is very simple. Over time, it greedily selects new samples. And then once that selection hits a certain size, you train, and that's it. And that's also why this is a benchmark and not a method for real use, because unlike some of the other more specific continual learning methods, this is still pretty resource demanding. So it's good for experimenting and seeing how incremental learning fits for your model, but it's not good for real use. But that's enough for our case. So the main point is we can follow that simple setup and test the ability of the model to learn incrementally by using one scenario or category at a time. So we first get an upper bound by training the model on all of the images. So this is the best case. We have everything, no resource or memory constraints. And then we gauge the impact of the data shift by training on each scenario separately. So understanding how much changing to a new environment affects the ability of the model to do what we want it to do. And then we test two variations of learning incrementally, one scenario at a time with the setup. So the result for the overall upper bound is 92.6%. So when it's trained on everything, that's the average accuracy across all scenarios. Then when gauging the impact of the shift, we saw that the performance can drop by as much as 74% in the face of a new, more difficult scenario. So it's highlighted in the table there to, make it a bit clearer. But I mean, a drop makes sense since it's a harder and unexpected situation, but it tends to be large drops, even when the data doesn't seem, at least to the human eye, to be that much more different or difficult than what we expect. Regarding the results of the incremental setups, there are three main takeaways. The first is that the incremental learning with a per environment memory constraint comes at a cost of about 3.5% accuracy. So if we incrementally train using only the new data from each new place as we change places, it can still get up to 3.5 less accuracy than if we kept everything and retrained with everything. And that's one of the biggest costs with the incremental way. You're sacrificing accuracy. The second main point is that if we incrementally train, then for the most difficult scenario, scenario 3, its result is actually 3% better than if we used everything to train. So that means the incremental approach is better at adapting to new environments than complete retraining with everything. But that also comes at the cost of our third point, which is the forgetting that gets introduced with the incremental approach. So if we keep everything, then the model can more or less maintain its accuracy in old places. But with the incremental way, it worsens in the old places as it adapts to the new ones. So it's not just as straightforward as saying, if you have the memory and compute, retrain normally, and if you don't, like you're on the edge, use the incremental way at the cost of some accuracy. The incremental way seems to be stronger in adapting to change. So it's also a matter of considering this trade-off between adaptability to new cases and the consolidation of knowledge from old cases, when you're considering if continual learning is practically beneficial or not to your application. So to conclude, during real use, once the input data starts to shift away from what a model was trained on, how you go about handling that shift can vary in terms of cost and difficulty, depending on your situation. So we used our license plate detection system to show examples of that shift and its impact. And we used some simple incremental learning tests to show that depending on your situation, continual learning's practical benefits can include resource friendliness at the cost of some accuracy and adaptability at the cost of knowledge consolidation. This would normally be where I talk about future work, but since this is now an older project, I can briefly mention the state of things since then. So we've since shifted focus to time series models because despite how common it is to have time series and tabular data for problems in real companies, they don't really get as much attention in recent literature, at least within certain spaces. It's also more difficult to see shifts in that kind of data because at least with pictures or natural text, you can see it, but with just numbers, it's a whole thing. So we're focusing on exploring this trade-off between adaptability and consolidation under change for time series data. And that's it. Thanks for listening. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of the seminar day, but are there any questions?
So any questions for Rishon? So Rishon, I don't have a question, but just curious. I mean, we haven't caught up in a while. So have you been applying continual learning to other problems as well for your PhD, or have you shifted to something different for your PhD?
Yeah, so we applied it to more problems in the time series space. So the industrial cases are heavily focused. So like manufacturing of discrete objects. So predicting what machines, predicting the power consumption of machines as they produce items, that kind of stuff. And we also applied it to some financial cases, like predicting whether or not to buy, sell, or hold a stock. And the performance varies a lot depending on the case. Like in finance, adaptability is a lot more important, whereas in industrial cases, the way things change are different. So consolidation or remembering old stuff is more important.
Okay, so but like in industry, I mean, I wouldn't expect it to change on a daily basis, right? So a particular cycle should be about the same every day, but I guess it changes on a like every over a month period. How does things change in a manufacturing scenario that you need to
Yes.
yeah.
So you're right, it doesn't change as frequently as like market changes, for instance. But aside from seasonal changes, there's also like degradation of machines. If the company wants to support new items, if they change their method, if they change the staff that use the machines, all of those things tend to add new, I guess, problems. And then also it's useful to if a firm wants to do this stuff, they might want to change the model that they use for one company to support another because there's not much data with these things.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of that one. Okay, all right. Thanks, Rishon. Yeah, you can give your virtual applause. Of course, yeah, Rishon, it's still early for you, so feel free to stick.
Yeah, I'll stick.
Um, so thanks again for showing up. I know you must be busy with your PhD. Well, do you plan to come home or not for this for Christmas?
No, unfortunately, I had some problems with my residence permit, so
Okay, all right. Well, enjoy your Christmas.
thanks.
Okay, so the next presentation is by me. And I had planned to do my presentations last, but I decided to do this one early on because some of the subsequent papers, kind of depend on some of this work. So I wanted to share it early so that you would better understand some of the later work or presentations. So okay, so the paper I was supposed to talk about was on specifically on an insurance company problem. But that work is actually based on a more, we've applied that algorithm to multiple different scenarios. So instead of focusing simply on the insurance case, I decided to talk about the more general case instead. And as I said, some of the later papers uses this algorithm. So that's why I wanted to present it early so that you have a clearer picture of what takes place later on. All right, so just some background. Let me just, this work initially started for an insurance company. And I think I mentioned early on why it started, trying to figure out the trade-off between having a personalized insurance policy and versus the robustness of that prediction. So here, so we developed an algorithm to really quantify that trade-off and come up with the best trade-off based on the data you have. And of course, the trade-off would change as the data set changes, as the number of samples increases. You could become more personalized. So let me just talk about a more generic case here. So we're going to look at a single feature at first and then see how you would combine multiple features. The rest of it I wouldn't do because the rest of it is actually what other people will be talking about later on. So the comparison with traditional methods, etc. So let's just look at a single quantitative feature. All right. So for instance, in this particular case, let's assume you're looking at somebody's balance. So you have a customer, you have their age, that's a feature, and we have their bank balance. All right, so it's a quantitative feature. And suppose we want to predict their balance given their age, etc. Now, there are two issues here. If we're looking at a given training set, there may be test samples for which there are no training, corresponding training samples. What I mean by that, suppose for a particular age, there are no samples whatsoever. All right, so you need to figure out predictor value balance for that particular age. So basically imputation. How would you do imputation? And typically, you do that by doing some sort of aggregation. You would group users by consecutive years, so maybe 10-year groups, and take the average over that group, etc. But we're going to look at a slightly different way of doing it. So here we're going to introduce a parameter kappa, which we would use for trading off personalization and robustness. And what I mean by this is we're gonna impute the value for this particular sample K. We're going to take a weighted average over all samples of the balances of those particular samples. So the balance of customer I is Y sub I. We're going to take a sum over all samples of Y sub I, but we're going to weight it based on the distance between the test sample and the training sample. So the ages people further away in age are weighted less than people closer in terms of age. So it's a exponentially decreasing weight. The denominator there is just for normalization purposes. Now, how do we get this kappa value? Well, we're going to use cross-validation. We're going to split into 80-20 training versus test split. And we're going to compute the MSE. So for a given kappa, we could compute the prediction by hat, compared with the test, compute the MSE, and vary kappa to see what gives us the best value. Now, look, if you look in the extreme cases with kappa equal to 0, what you actually end up with is an average of y sub I over all samples. So it's basically ignoring the age value, the age feature, and just taking the average of all samples. In the case kappa equal to infinity, now in this statement is wrong. In the case of kappa equal to infinity, since we impute in here, there are no values at this particular age for customer K. But what you could show is that as kappa goes to infinity, the limit goes to the average of samples closest to this particular age. All right, so that could be shown in was shown in another paper, but because in this particular case we have no samples at that particular age, and the optimal kappa lies somewhere in between these two extremes. So this is how you would do imputation. You would get a weighted average over all samples, and you would weight closer values more. All right, now if regression, in this particular case, we have samples at this particular age K. So it's the same computation as before, except that you're now going to include the samples at that particular age. And what you could show here now is that as kappa goes to infinity, the prediction is just the average over all samples of the age of test sample K. All right. And again, you know, the optimal value of kappa would lie between these two extremes. So we could use this for imputation, and then also we could use it for prediction. And so you would use it over all ages and get values for all ages. All right, so let's take an example. Let me just check on time here. So 20, all right. So let's go back to this insurance example. So in insurance, you know, typically you look at things like frequency of accidents, severity of accidents, etc., and use that for risk analysis. What we decided to do is look at a different metric, which actually combines both of those. We look at the average cost of claims per year for a particular customer. So if it's costing the company more per year to satisfy claims for an individual, that means that customer is more risky. All right, so that's the label we use, the average claim rate for a customer, and the feature is going to be age. Here we're going to vary kappa, and we use cross-validation to find this optimal kappa value. By the way, we normalize with the average value at kappa equal to 0. If you remember, kappa equal to 0 corresponds to average, taking the average over all samples. So you're predicting the same thing for each test sample, and that prediction is just the average over all training samples. And you come up with the MSE for that, and you're going to normalize with that value. So if you plot this mean square error as a function of kappa, this is what you get, right? In this particular case, optimal kappa is about 1.6. But it shows the trade-off that we expected, this bias variance trade-off, or personalization versus robustness trade-off. For kappa close to 0, basically you start ignoring the feature itself. You ignore the fact that things vary over age, all right? You're just taking the average over everything. So you lose the personalization information. And so that, that's why you have a higher mean square error. For kappa very large, you have the opposite. You start looking only at samples close to your test sample. So you have fewer samples to average over. And so you have loss of accuracy because of that, right? Because of robustness. And so again, the MSE starts going back up. And so you have this nice trade-off between the two, and we want to find the value of kappa that gives you the optimal value. So here you could actually see the effect of doing this. This is actual data for a particular insurance company, claim rate versus age. All right, so the blue corresponds to the actual, if we take each age and average the samples of, average the claim rate over all samples at that age, that will give you the blue value. So that's unfiltered. This is the raw data. All right. The green corresponds to kappa equal to 0, which is the average over all samples. And because we normalize the claims, then that average is just 1. The orange is what you get with this filter or with kappa equal to 1.6. So for each age, you would do that weighted average over all samples to get the orange value. And so you see that the orange, in the orange case, you maintain some of the personalization. You maintain the fact that at low, for younger people have higher claim rates than older people. So you keep that personalization factor, but you maintain robustness as well, right? By having a smoother version of the data. All right, so that was for quantitative features. You could do something similar for categorical features, where for each category, because in this particular case, there's no notion of distance between two categories, right? In the case of age, you had a notion of distance. Here, what we do instead is for each category, we average the label over all samples in that category. All right, so that's this white hat key for category key. And now the distance between two categories is taken to be the distance between these average sample values. And we use that distance now to do the same weighted value estimation as before to predict values. All right. So now note that the prediction is using this average sample value for each category. So you could do that computation for distance, and then you could do this weighted average and come up with a prediction. And now the interesting thing is, all right, so here we have an example where we just look at a single, same insurance case, but we're looking at gender, male and female. So there's no real, typically you would use one-hot encoding or something to make males 0, females 1, etc., and use that as distance. Here we're using a slightly different approach. So we could do this computation, and the interesting thing is, once we do this computation to come up with better predictions for each category. So initially the category, the value for category is the average over all samples. We do this computation to come up with a better prediction for each category. So now we've changed the distances between categories. We have a better estimate of distances between categories. So we can repeat the process. And this is what happens. You actually get an improvement. So during the first iteration is the blue line. And this second iteration actually gives you an improvement And you could go again, but of course the improvement gets less and less. Now, typically, you know, if you have a sufficient number of samples per category, there's no need to do this, computation, but it just shows that this whole approach that we use for quantitative could be applied here as well. Now, to combine all the, to combine features now, since distance for each feature, whether it's a quantitative feature or categorical feature, since distance is in terms of the label value, then all feature distances are in a single unit, meaning the unit of the label. So if we were looking at insurance, the unit would be in claim rate, right? So dollars basically. So because they all have the same unit, it's now easy to combine them using a, you know, maybe a Euclidean or Manhattan or whatever distance metric you want to use. So the distance between two samples is the sum of the square of the feature distances and the square root of that. And now you could use the same, so now we have a notion of distance between samples over multiple features. And we can now use the same weighted approach over all samples, where we have this using this kappa sub zero as the hyperparameter value. And we could optimize over that now. In terms of feature selection, the fact that for each feature, we're going to do this optimization of a kappa, we now have MSE values for each features. So we could use those MSE values to determine which features are important and which are not. And so we could do combine features based on that. This is what you would get when you combine 6 features for the insurance company case. And this is a combination of categorical and quantitative features. And as you see, as you vary kappa sub zero, you do get this trade-off as we mentioned before. In this particular case, kappa sub zero is 9, which means there's a high degree of personalization, right? Because the higher the value of kappa, the more personalized you become, because the sharper the reduction in the weighting. All right, so let me stop there because the rest would be handled by papers later on. But we've applied this whole approach of computing this distance between two samples. We've used it in classification and clustering, etc., because it gives you a better way to compute distances as opposed to using things like one-hot encoding, etc. So there are 2 aspects: a better way of computing distance, and then for the regression part, you know, this whole approach of weighted combining all samples using these weights is also something we've used and successfully. So I will stop there. I wasn't keeping track of my time, but you know, I'm sure it was within appropriate time. Any questions on that? As I said, you know, you will have follow-on publications on this topic as well later on. But I'll take any questions now on this particular case. All right, so no questions. So let's move on to, I believe Karishma is, let me just check. Yeah, so Karishma will be next. She will be presenting two of her papers. I believe Karishma is here, right?
Yeah, I'm seeing her.
Yeah, so Karishma, you could go ahead and share your screen and present. So Karishma did her MSc in data science with me as well. And one of these papers was based on that. Yeah, Karishma, we're not. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, I'm not as well.
So we'll just give us some time to figure out what's going on there. And after Karishma is Johnny, but I'm not seeing Johnny here.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Karishma. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. All right. So, this paper I would have done last year as part of my MSc thesis for data science. So, a little bit on the background of the problem. So, Trinidad agriculture sector is contributing 7% of the country's GDP, and now it is just 1%. So, majority of the factors affecting a crop price is the volume produced. So the first quarter of 2021, there has been a decrease in total vegetable production by 29.5 percent, with significant reductions in crops like cucumber, tomatoes, and pumpkin. And this is mainly due to the excessive rainfall and the pandemic. Um, Global inflation also contributed to increases in crop prices due to increases in shipping and freight costs. Also, the issue we're having with foreign exchange. So, an issue we face here is that majority of our food supply is imported, so consumers must pay more for fresh produce. And as of April 2023, our food inflation was 11.2%, which was up from 6.6% in January last year. And now our food import bill is approximately 5 billion TT dollars. So there has been government intervention to reduce this value by encouraging consumers to purchase locally. So external factors like weather can cause crop price fluctuation, and this can cause emotional distress to farmers. So it is important to forecast crop prices so farmers can monitor these prices and determine better planting, harvesting, and selling dates to maximize their profits. So research has done it into crop price forecasting, however, no external variables were considered. And in addition, the direct and recursive strategies were only compared on machine learning models, but not traditional statistical models. So in this study, we focus on the prices of 10 crops using seasonal ARIMA models, taking into account for external factors, which were the volume traded, the temperatures and precipitation, and a comparison of the direct and recursive strategies were also done for multi-step forecasting. Now, a disadvantage of the seasonal ARIMA models and multi-step forecasting is that you have to forecast the exogenous variables first before the target variable, and this leads to accumulation of prediction errors, and the model loses accuracy as the horizon increases. Taking this into consideration, recursive one-step forecasting is done, and in all instances, accuracy was measured using mean absolute percentage error and root mean square error. So the methodology, data cleaning, we use a base model. Then we did time series decomposition. We determined suitable exogenous variables and the model parameters by using the models that had the lowest AIC value. then we did model identification, we did the forecasting, and we selected the best models for each of the crops. So in the recursive forecasting, the same model is used repeatedly and previous predictions are used as input. So there's an increase in error causing the model performance to degrade over time. In the direct, a new model is created for each prediction, so there is no accumulation of errors. However, there is an increase in computational time. And the direct method is a hybrid model, which is a combination of the direct and recursive forecasting. So a new model is created for each prediction, and the previous prediction is added to the model. So data set description. So we looked at 8 locally produced crops and 2 imported crops. The data set were obtained from NAMDEVCO and from Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service. So after cleaning, we had 192 rows and 26 columns with the monthly average prices, the volume traded, rainfall, temperature from January 1st, 2006 to December 2021. So a little bit of exploratory analysis with the exception of banana, all the prices were right skewed, suggesting that some months has higher prices, and with the exception of banana, volume as well was also right skewed. If we look at these graphs here, there's seasonality in the average precipitation with less rainfall from January to May corresponding to the dry season and more rainfall from June to December corresponding to the wet season. And in some years, like 2017 and 2020, there were more rainfall than usual. There's also seasonality in the maximum and minimum temperatures. So looking at the results now, so this table summarizes the models for each crop and the mean absolute percentage scores, with the lowest score in bold indicating the best models. So in 3 models, the significant factors were significant predictors. The recursive strategy outperformed for the crops tomato and cabbage. The direct outperformed for 7 of the crops, and the hybrid model outperformed for ginger. And this table here is for the one-step forecast. We compared it to the base model and the recursive model, and in 7 instances, the recursive model better than the naive model. So since majority of the crop prices were right skewed, removal of outliers could improve accuracy. There's also a new metric called resistant MAPE, which includes outliers but preventing them from dominating the measure of error. So this metric could be considered. The direct method tends to perform better for nonlinear data, and we saw that it outperformed in 7 instances. So we could also consider a neural network approach. And structural breaks in time series can arise due to war, pandemic, and changes in government policies. These breaks can lead to large forecasting errors, leading to unreliable models. So given that there was the COVID pandemic, then structural break tests can be applied to the time series. So in conclusion, for multi-step forecasting, we saw that the direct method outperformed for 7 crops and the hybrid method outperformed for 1 crop. For the one-step forecast, the recursive outperformed for 7 crops, and the ARIMA models for tomato, lettuce, and cabbage gave lower MAPE scores for one-step forecast than the multi-step forecast, indicating that it is better to perform one-step forecasting when there are external factors. So this is the end. Any questions?
Any questions for Karishma on the first topic? Yeah, so just to emphasize, food security is a major issue these days, and so this is one way of starting to address some of the issues. But of course, data is always an issue. With limited data, we could do just so much. Okay, if no questions, Karishma, you want to go on to the next presentation?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Right, so this paper on the prediction of kidney stone farmers, I did this while I was a research assistant at San Fernando Hospital with Dr. Assad. So the prevalence of kidney stone disease has increased globally, with the US having a prevalence of 11% between 2015 and 2018. Saudi Arabia 20%, Asia between 1 and 5%, Europe 5 to 9%. So the increased risk in the formation of kidney stones can be attributed to several lifestyle, genetic, dietary, and environmental factors. And studies have found that there is a positive association between greater BMI and diabetes and the risk of developing kidney stones. And persons living with kidney stone disease, they can experience several signs and symptoms and undergo numerous surgical procedures, with some of these cases even leading to death. So early detection will reduce the treatment costs and improve the patient's quality of life by allowing them to make early lifestyle changes. So in this study, we used several machine learning models to predict whether a person currently has a stone or will likely develop one in the near future given certain lifestyle features and risk factors. So the data set was obtained from the Trinidad and Tobago Kidney Stone Survey done in September of last year by researchers from UWI. And from the survey, the selected features included the demographic, the stone status, family history, comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, the level of activity, whether they are mostly indoors or outdoors, and the outcome. So there were a total of 15 features and 1,220 responses. So of the 1,220 responses, 53% were males, 47% were males, 53% were females, and there was a mean age of 45 years. 16% currently have kidney stones that was confirmed by some form of imaging, while 84% indicated that they never had kidney stones or they had them in the past. 4% of the persons were underweight, 35% had a healthy weight, 36% were overweight, and 25% was obese. The chi-square test performed under the 5% level of significance indicated that the variables area, heart disease, and smoking status were independent of the outcome, so these variables were removed. And the Levine's test and the two-sample t-test indicated that the variables age and BMI were significant factors. So to account for the unbalanced data set, undersampling and k-fold cross-validation was done for 10 folds, and the EUC performance metric was used to select the best model, and we tested it on 6 different traditional statistical models. The EUC score on the test data indicated that the logistic regression model had a 77% chance of correctly distinguishing between a positive and a negative outcome. So to improve on this, we use the newly developed regression algorithm that Prof explained earlier. So If we apply this concept to our study and let's see the prediction for a patient where 0 represents having not having a kidney stone, 1 represents having a kidney stone. X would be a training set, Y a training sample, and D would be the distance between the patient and the sample. We can think of the weighted average as the probability of developing kidney stone in the near future. With this modification, we compare this algorithm to the logistic regression model, and we got a higher AUC score for all the tenfolds. The blue line represents the new algorithm. This algorithm gave an AUC score of 0.821, so it indicates that it has an 82% chance of correctly distinguishing between a positive and a negative outcome. So in conclusion, we show that this new algorithm outperformed the traditional statistical models, and for future will the issue of sampling bias can be addressed. The survey was marketed in healthcare institutions, so it was biased towards a positive outcome and therefore underrepresented the non-stone formers, and performance can be improved by distinguishing between symptomatic from asymptomatic, self-reported from clinically diagnosed, and confirmed from suspected cases. So this is the end. Any questions?
So any questions for Karishma? You know, this is another area we would like to spend more effort on, health. So health and agriculture. But health data is hard to come by, you know, because of, you know, various reasons, confidentiality, etc. But one thing Karishma showed is that, you know, when we have small data sets as we do in Trinidad, you know, using a more specific algorithms like the one she presented at the end, the kappa stuff, helps. So it you know, when I asked her to evaluate kappa, I didn't, you know, the new algorithm, you know, it wasn't, we didn't do anything unfairly to show it better than the others. It just happened to be better. All right, so thanks Karishma. Next would have been Johnny, but he is having some problems with his laptop. So I'm gonna go to the next presentation. The next three are recorded presentations because the presenters couldn't do it in person. So let me, unfortunately, each of them are in a different format. So I'll have to switch back and forth. Let me first find the first one here.
Good day.
All right, the first one is going to be by Mindy, and hopefully this works.
Good day. Today we'll be discussing bilingual.
Just checking if people can hear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dialect classification using natural language processing. My name is Fazia Mohammed, and I am a data enthusiast. And I'm interested in making the world more machine readable. I have participated in numerous TTLAB projects such as the Cropper Foundation's National Geographic Research Grant, as well as WIDS and numerous discussions on data science and biodiversity. Today, we'll be covering a brief introduction of the problem, a bit about the telecommunications market, the data set, linguistics, NLP, data set description, performance, and a short conclusion. So let's get into it. Natural language processing is our starting point. It's a technology that enables machines to understand, interpret, and generate human-like text. Think of it as a bridge between human language and computer understanding. Today, we'll be leveraging that tool on a data set that is filled with bilingual comments. NLP finds its application in various areas such as text-based surveys, chatbots, social media. Imagine interacting with a chatbot or participating in a survey. That's NLP in action. And to further elaborate into this genre of machine learning, I would first like to address some common words I'll be using throughout this presentation. Here we have multinomial logistic regression. It's an advanced version of logistic regression where you have more than two categories used to predict. So imagine it is something like a student picking a major. You have computer science, biology, business, and multinomial regression helps us understand the likelihood of a student choosing a particular major based on various factors such as GPA, extracurricular activities, and so on. XGBoost, or extreme gradient boosting, is a powerful machine learning algorithm that excels in accuracy and efficiency. It's like having a team of experts vote on the best decision. So you can think about it as each expert looking at different aspects of a student's behavior to determine whether they'll pass or fail. So they would probably look at study hours, attendance, past performance to make their prediction, and the XGBoost then combines their votes for the most accurate results. We have support vector machine, which is a really smart algorithm for classification. It finds the best way to separate different categories by creating a hyperplane. So let's say you wanted to predict the students who pass or fail. They would look for a hyperplane between these students, and it's like the most efficient way to divide these students based on their features. And we also used BERT, a bidirectional encoder representation from transformers. BERT is a language model that excels at grasping context, and it does this by, you could think of it as, considering both words before and after each word. So it's like having a deep conversation with your phone and asking it like, what is the weather tomorrow going to be? And it helps the phone understand the context of your question. And then we have here precision, F1 score, and accuracy. Precision is the true positive predictions, the sum of true positives and false positives. F1 score is a more comprehensive evaluation metric, and we have accuracy, and we'll go into more details when we look at evaluation of the model. So let's talk a bit about telecommunications market and the problem that we're trying to solve. Do you think your telecommunications provider cares about the service or the service that you receive? The insights derived from NLP can play a crucial role in understanding customer issues, serving as the backbone for decision making within a company. This is a scenario we often encounter is one where enough complaints about a service or plan can lead to the necessary change. However, the sheer volume of complaints tends to overwhelm most customer care departments in the region. A typical customer care department consists of about maybe 100 to 150 people responsible for addressing a myriad of concerns. Now imagine the complaints flooding in through various channels such as chatbots, calls, texts, Facebook, Instagram, surveys, specialized applications, and imagine this happening during service outages. The influx can easily overwhelm even the most well-staffed department. This is the crux of our challenge. The question becomes, how can we leverage natural language processing and classification to streamline this process? Our goal is to efficiently route customers to the right department, ensuring a quick and effective solutions to their concerns. And using NLP, we are able to craft a solution to this intricate issue. So continuing from our previous discussion about customer care departments, we would like to take a look at what sort of data these customer care departments have been overwhelmed with. The comments received are a fascinating mix of linguistic challenges. In some cases, we have the Creole dialect with numerous words not found in the English dictionary, comments themselves exhibiting various complexities with misplaced symbols, unconventional capitalization, and numbers, creating an interesting linguistic landscape. To add to that complexity, we also have a recent amount of migrants from Venezuela to Trinidad, and this community puts in an extra effort to be understood, and they often use a hybrid of Spanish and English together in the comments that they send in to different chatbots and surveying data sources. Translating these comments seems like the straightforward solution. However, in this process, sometimes the original meaning of the comment is lost because you automated using a translator and they have too their own unique dialect. Now let's consider some of the practical implications. The objective is not just to understand these comments, but to accurately classify them and route them to the respective departments. However, the classification process emerges as the most time-consuming part of the entire workflow. To navigate this linguistic complexity effectively, we need a robust pre-processing strategy. But first, we must understand the global linguistic diversity in the Caribbean. For Trinidad and Tobago in specific, some of the linguistical complexities that must be understood are the bilingual and multifaceted linguistic landscape, which in the realm of Trinidad and Tobago presents a fusion of European, African, Indian, and indigenous languages. This diversity poses a challenge for traditional NLP models, urging us to develop approaches that can seamlessly navigate through dialects existing within the same region. Trinidad Creole as a unique language. Within the context of NLP, Trinidad Creole emerges as a unique challenge and opportunity. This language, born from a fusion of multiple linguistical influences, demands specialized techniques. Dynamic linguistical shifts due to migration. The recent influx of Venezuelan nationals introduces a new layer of complexity to NLP, where the introduction of Spanish and understanding code switching, language adaptation, and the emergence of hybrid comments becomes paramount to accurately processing this evolving context. To really understand this, we must then look at previous studies done on dialect data. Related works. Having explored Trinidad and Tobago's linguistical complexities, we should delve into other studies like how multilingual is multilingual bird, which demonstrates the effectiveness of large-scale multilingual models leveraging cloud computing for simultaneous operations across different languages. Part of speech tagging highlighted in POS tagging of dialect Arabic is crucial for data chunking and enhancing statistical language models. This minimally supervised approach, as discussed by Duh and Kirchhoff, faces challenges in Arabic dialect processing, such as limited resources and difficulty in tagging the spoken language. Another study done on the temporal dimension, often overlooked by most studies, word epoch disambiguation by Melika and Nasty, employs supervised learning to predict words' historical context. Similarly, semantic density analysis by Kaufman, Sagi, and Clark uses latent semantic analysis to track the changes in words' meanings across time and phonetic space. Let's look a bit at the data set that we're dealing with and the process. So as I mentioned before, the data came in from different surveys, chatbots, complaints, calls, and social media sites that are all directed to one Excel sheet. The Excel sheet data needed to be cleaned. We took all the unusual capitalization and put them to lower cases. We took out numeric values, removed any sort of symbols, we removed duplicated text, and in some cases we handled missing data as best we could. We removed any abbreviations or acronyms, and we attempted to spell check majority of the data. However, at the end, it removed some of the meanings of the words because it would correct words like dotish or any colloquial word into the nearest English word, which took away from the meaning of the statement. So in the end, we ended up not doing that. And then after that, cleaning the data, we started pre-processing, where we tokenized, used stemming and lemmatization, and then text vectorizations, where we use TF-IDF algorithm. And well, BIT had its own processing streamline, where we applied their unique tokenizations, encoding and decoding algorithms, which allowed us to understand the context more effectively, breaking down words into smaller units. After this, we looked at the performance of the data that we fed into these models, and the performance looked like this. Having navigated the linguistic complexities of Trinidad and Tobago and looking at previous studies done, overall our selection for models that we were building were multinomial logistic regression, XGBoost, SVM, and BERT. There was a significant time constraint on the project of 3 months, so we had to be very selective with what we were applying. And to evaluate these models, we evaluated it using precision, accuracy, and F1 scores. Accuracy gauges the model's ability to correctly identify the comment and put them into classes, whereas precision measures its resilience to false positives. And they're both very pivotal, especially when implications like data-driven decisions and advertising costs hinge on accurate client targeting. They have F1 score is a more holistic metric that strikes a balance between precision, recall, providing nuanced perspectives by considering false negatives. And now into our results. As we can see, the SVM machine learning model was the front runner with an F1 score of 79%, showcasing commendable precision and accuracy at 80%. The XGBoost is also pretty top-notch at 85 and ranks in second, while Brit stands out with an impressive accuracy of 91%, but a relatively lower F1 score at 61%. And this may be because the decoders and encoders are more they're more tailored to standard English, whereas in this situation, there's a lot of dialect with respect to both English dialect, Creole dialect, and Spanish dialect. And from what we know about these models, having the SVM be the best is really not that surprising, since it is a classification situation, and there would be a certain words that a person would use to describe their issue, regardless of the additions of different colloquial terms. So let's just go straight into conclusion and future works. Our study demonstrated commendable multi-classification performance, surpassing the challenges posed by diverse dialects. There's a lot of work still to be done in it. Future endeavors can delve more into the intricacies of handling multiple linguistic influences, such as a Venezuelan dialect dictionary for enhanced Spanish comment processing. The Spanish comments made up approximately 20% of the overall dataset. And you can also, for future works, explore cutting-edge transfer learning techniques like GPT to further elevate dialect data classification. Thank you for your time, and I'm really sorry I couldn't be here in person, but I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about this topic. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah, unfortunately, Minnie couldn't be here to answer questions in person. One thing we haven't tried, this kappa algorithm on is NLP problems. I know Kevin was looking at that, so maybe we could see how it works with Mindy's data. Okay, so Johnny is here. He had some issues with his laptop, but he will present. But I will be sharing his slides. So let me just find his slides here and. Okay, I'm bringing up his slides and. Okay, so Johnny, you're there, right? You can.
I'm here.
Just tell me
Everyone
when to.
hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you, and I assume you can see these slides, right?
Yeah, that's fine. All
Yeah.
right. Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Tew. Educational background is mechanical engineering. So I did my undergrad and my MPhil with a focus on vibration. Yeah, and we'll transition to data science not too long ago. So I guess I should say currently working on I'm one of the D-Hub Challenge finalists, or awardees, I guess. Under the EMA Challenge, so it's a noise reporting tool and solution. So hopefully you could get some data there to do some trends on noise pollution in Trinidad. So I'm also working on a Shell grant being processed through UE, which this paper is based on. So I guess could go to the next slide, maybe. Yes, so the impetus for this paper really originates from a competition that was held last year, the Shell AI Hackathon 2022, where me and Shankar Ramharak placed second overall in the university category, which tackled a data science approach to the optimization of EV infrastructure. Next slide. To provide some context, many countries around the world are incorporating electric vehicles as part of their strategy to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and in part to meet their Paris Climate Agreement, which aims to have 20% EV market penetration by 2030. As of 2022, this figure stands at 2.1%. Next slide. According to the IEA, International Energy Agency's targets. Electric vehicles differ from traditional internal combustion vehicles, so gasoline and diesel, that we are familiar with, through the use of electric motors, which are powered by batteries. However, next slide. Consumers are faced with two separate but tightly intermingled hindrances, sparse infrastructure and charging anxiety. Next slide. Well, yeah. And charging anxiety is the fear that a user's vehicle would lose power on their way to their destination. Thus, these combined hinder the EV market penetration. And while through proper modeling and planning, government or private agencies can reduce the severity and impact of these effects, increasing the market potential. So going back to the competition itself, Shell provided all teams with two data sets essentially for an undisclosed location. First one is a historical demand data set for about 4,096 locations between the years 2010 and 2018. Next slide. And the existing charging infrastructures for those 4,096 locations during the same period. Next slide. And then they challenged the teams to determine the optimal placement for EV charging stations for 2 subsequent years. So here's just like a little graphic of the data that they give. So it's 2 things really, a heat map and then a spatial distribution of the charges. The heat map itself shows the EV charging demand for each of the 4,096 grid cells. You can see locations where it has 0 demand. You could think of that as bounding locations for, well, the bounding region for the location. So you can think of it like an ocean where or the sea where there isn't any actual demand. And interspersed in the actual landmass itself, you'd also see some locations with 0 charging demand. And that can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. Like it is like a protected forested area or internal water bodies or locations that already have their charging demand fully satisfied already by existing infrastructure. And the spatial distribution, the white dots, you could think of those are the locations of 100 100 existing locations for slow and fast chargers. So next slide. So our solution structure, it's pretty simple. It's 3 phases, well, technically 2. The first phase is, well, the CAP algorithm that we are familiar with. I believe we did like a very naive implementation of it and thought of it like a weighted neighborhood average. So we could gather some information spatially. And then from the reweighted demands that we did, we applied the weighted neighborhood average to the historical charging demand. We then applied a regularized polynomial regression. I believe it's like a 3rd order. ended up being somewhere like between a 2 and a third order. And from there, we take our predicted demands and did optimization in Julia. Next slide. So yeah, this is just like a better breakdown of our solution structure. We used the first 8 years, I guess, 2010 to 2017 as our trading data for, I guess, the kappa algorithm to determine our value for kappa. And the kappa algorithm and the regularized polynomial regression serves as our demand prediction model. And we then just feed it into Julia, where we formulated the problem as a mixed integer linear programming problem. Next slide. So yeah, I guess this is just talking about the kappa algorithm. So this is a bit of a, I guess, my interpretation of it within the context of charging stations and the analogous gas stations like gasoline or diesel. You could garner information spatially. So if you have, say, two gas stations nearby to each other, if one has a long line in front of it, you could probably presume that the gas station that's nearby to that one would also probably have a long line. So you could garner information spatially from surrounding point. Next slide. Yeah, so you could just take information from just the surrounding points. Next slide. And this is just the part of the naive kappa approach. The thing I need to go into the formula too deeply. So for each demand point, K, well, is it K? Well, demand point J, we apply the kappa weighted to the kappa equation to that point using all the surrounding points based on the Euclidean distance. And well, since it's cells, it's pretty straightforward to get our distances here. Next slide. And yeah, simple regularized regression. It didn't end up being too difficult to do. Next slide. Yeah, I think this graph is just showing the difference in mean squared errors if you just use a pure quadratic or cubic prediction. And I believe this one, I think the cubic ended up being a bit more accurate, while having a lower mean squared error. Next slide. So yeah, for the optimization part, we got 3 cost functions from the organizer shell. The first one is on our left here, is based on, think of it like a equation representing charging anxiety. So X sub ij is like the distance that a consumer would have to drive to reach their charging station, and D sub ij is the actual demand at that point. The equation on the top right, CIC, that's our infrastructure cost. This is just the cost for developing the charging stations there. So SCS is our slow chargers, FCS is our fast chargers. And well, I left out the I guess third cost, which was just an internal measuring tool that Shell used to measure our prediction. But unfortunately, it doesn't, well, fortunately and unfortunately, we don't have to include it in our actual optimization calculation here, which we just treat as a minimization problem because we're just trying to minimize the costs associated with charging anxiety and developing infrastructure. Next slide. Yeah, and this is just the constraints that we subject our optimization to. X sub ij, so that's just the distances. It can't be negative. The number of slow chargers and fast chargers, they have to be positive integers. The third constraint, the number of slow and fast chargers can't exceed the parking capacity of the parking lot that we are developing the charging stations on. X sub ij, or I believe I misspoke earlier, the X sub ij is the the demand. The demand has to be positive. Fourth is essentially just saying that the demand for the location must be less than the available charging demand. Fifth line is just our incremental infrastructure must be built upon. We can't just take away chargers from a station, from a location. And last one is just, you can ignore that one. Next slide. So yeah, again, it's a mixed integer linear programming problem, fairly simple, which we formulated in Julia and solved using a CBC coin branch cut solver. I believe I tried other solvers like Ruby and whatnot, but I believe CBC gave us the fastest and most accurate for this formulation of the problem. Next slide. And yeah, we could formulate it as a network flow model as well. So we just, of course, associated going from one to node to next. But we didn't get to implement it yet. Maybe we would when we do our projects later. Next slide. Placement, we placed second overall, second in the university category behind a team from Texas A&M, and 8th overall from, I believe, 5,000 teams. So that's me and Shankar on the bottom. I'm the Chinese guy on the right-hand side. Next slide. And yeah, outcomes and future work. Well, as I said, we got a grant from Shell through UE to develop our solution. But it really takes the form of the whole process, really, which starts from getting data. So there's a lack of public or open source charging demand data. So in the initial stages, we would be trying to develop some sort of model to get charging demand data from proxy data, like say affluence. And hopefully from that, we could develop some open source charging demand data sets. And later on, we will do some work on the capital algorithm for this spatial problem. I think that's it. Oh yeah, that's it. All right, thanks, Prof.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. So and any questions for Johnny? All right, as usual, you could do a virtual applause. A couple of things about the competition. When Johnny and Shankar entered, they had to ramp up from learning optimization, integer programming. They had to learn Julia to deploy the algorithm. So they had to do quite a bit of work, but they were able to get up to the stage of being second in the academia. I didn't realize you all were 8th overall, Johnny. That's impressive as well. I'm sure with a little bit more time, they would have done better beyond that. But one interesting thing is we applied this kappa thing as well to spatial data and got improvements. It's just, again, it's the concept is just a trade-off between personalization, which is, the specific demand center, and getting data from or information from the surrounding neighbors, all right? One thing we potentially could do as well, and we didn't, hadn't thought about it, is applying it to the regression part of the project as well. Okay, so any questions for Johnny? All right, thanks again, Johnny. I know you had some issues with your laptop, but we were able to get it done.
I guess I could just say one last thing on it.
Sure.
Before we did the weighted neighborhood average, the kappa algorithm on the data set, when we were just using the regularized regression, essentially we had an improvement of the scoring system was about out of 100. We jumped like about 20 points essentially just from the kappa algorithm.
Oh, nice. Nice to know. Yeah. All right, thanks again, Johnny. So we have another recorded presentation. So let me bring that up next.
Good day, everyone. My name is Navin Ramasa, and I've been with.
So let's where's this one?
Everyone, my name is Navin Ramasa, and I've been working as a data scientist for the past.
Just checking if people can hear.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
3 years at Guardian Group, and today I will be presenting my paper entitled A Cost Minimization Approach to Automobile Insurance Fraud. It was co-authored by Shiva Ramadit, Nirvan Sharma, and Professor Patrick Lucy. As most of you are aware, fraud is deliberate deception by a person, group of people, or a company for the purpose of financial gain. Automobile insurance fraud or motor insurance fraud, as it is commonly.
No, yeah, it's everyone just hang on a bit.
Hard fraud and soft fraud.
Okay. Yeah. So let me. I guess it stopped for some reason.
Yeah, I've seen a black screen, and the audio had cut as well. Maybe your Wi-Fi had dropped.
Okay. Let me reshare.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is using VLC, and that might be an issue here.
Oh, the format. Okay, yeah, we could see your screen again.
Okay, so let me just back up a bit. All right.
As most of you are aware, fraud is deliberate deception by a person, group of people, or a company for the purpose of financial gain. Automobile insurance fraud or motor insurance fraud, as it is commonly referred to as, is the most common type of insurance fraud. It can be classified into either hard fraud or soft fraud. So, hard fraud occurs when a policyholder intentionally plans to elicit financial compensation with an illegitimate claim. So, for example, let's say the policyholder wants to get a claim payout, so then he or she decides to drive the car into a river and then report it as stolen. On the other hand, soft fraud occurs when a claim is legitimate, but the policyholder exaggerates the claim amount to receive a larger compensation. This is more opportunistic fraud, and an extreme example is a simple fender bender, but the claim is for half the cost of the car. So our system in principle should be able to detect both hard fraud and soft fraud. To put it into perspective, in the United States of America, it is estimated that fraudulent claims total at least 80 billion USD per year. And it's estimated that less than 4% of auto insurance fraud claims are prosecuted. So now imagine fraudulent activity is more rampant in developing countries like here in Trinidad, since the insurance companies located here have less resources to investigate and prosecute fraudulent activity. So in developing countries, detecting fraud requires human involvement, or in the case of larger companies, rule-based systems are used. So now rule-based systems, first start by defining a list of binary rules that each characterize a potentially suspicious situation or incident. These rules are derived from managers or other domain experts' intuitions and experience, uh, what years spent operating in the field. A claim that flags one or more of these rules are subject to thorough investigation. So now, while this approach is simple and understandable, it can also produce many false positives, which results in polluting the pool of claims to investigate. With lots of these false positives, it will decrease operational efficiency, which then subsequently increases customer dissatisfaction. Claims that take longer to process or that are falsely flagged as fraudulent may even lead customers to consider a different company. And of course, investigating a claims incurs a cost to the company themselves. So companies being profit driven need to find a way to balance the cost benefit of the investigation as a whole. So for our dataset, we had 6,855 claims from the period of 2018 to 2021. And for each of these claims, we had information pertaining to the client details, such as information in clients, such as the gender, the marital status, and we also had policy details for the claim. This includes like the premium amount and also any vehicle information, such as like the type of vehicle, the year, the make, and from this dataset, there were only 7 confirmed fraudulent cases. But keep in mind that out of the remaining claims from the dataset, there could have been more instances of fraud that were just not detected or investigated. So based on the, the data we had, and given the limited number of confirmed fraudulent cases, the problem was framed as a semi-supervised machine learning problem. We used anomaly detection to find more suspicious claims. Then we used cost-sensitive learning to produce a classifier for flagging claims for investigation. The goal being to provide a streamlined list of suspicious claims that would minimize the operational costs to the business. So how we did this, we used the feedback from claim handlers with expert domain knowledge to highlight behaviors that may indicate suspicious activity. So this was captured in various using feature engineering using different indicator variables. So some of these indicators included flags for whether the claim occurred within 1 year of the policy being issued, or if the claim occurred within 3 months of the policy expiring. Another indicator we had was if the accident occurred at a very questionable time. So we like early in the morning. So we for our feature we use between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. So the anomaly detection algorithms were used to obtain a larger list of claims that showed deviations from typical patterns. A random subset of these anomalies were reviewed by domain experts to determine if these claims had sufficient reasonable doubt on legitimacy and whether they warranted further investigation. After this review, we obtained a further 50 fraudulent claims to be used for the cost-sensitive learning model. For our semi-supervised approach, we used 2 anomaly detection algorithms, namely isolation forest and local outlier factor, to get claims that showed deviations. So we also looked at how many of the original 7 fraudulent claims were picked up by these algorithms before sending the random subset of claims to the claim handlers. And for cost-sensitive learning, we use 3 variations of the logistic regression algorithm. That is the regular logistic regression, weighted logistic regression, and weighted logistic regression using smooth. So for the cost-sensitive approach, a false positive error equates to labeling a claim as fraudulent when no fraud has been committed, while a false negative error occurs if we label a claim as legitimate when in reality it's fraudulent. Our main aim is to minimize the number of false negatives, as this will reduce the financial impact to the business. In the case of this particular business, the false negative error cost is 7 times more costly than a false positive error. The cost of a false positive error was derived from using business advice on the cost of resources that it takes to investigate a claim, and the cost of a false negative error was calculated using the average yearly paid out claim amount over the time period. One thing to note is that these are claims that were eventually detected, and so they were more visible than the ones that were missed. Hence, we believe that the average cost of a claim that was missed would be smaller than the average cost of a fraudulent claim that was caught. We compared the expected cost of our approach by using different costs and weights in our logistic regression algorithm. So this is what we use. So the formula is that the expected cost C is defined as the cost of a false negative error multiplied by the probability of a false negative error. And that is then added to the cost of a false positive error multiplied by the probability of a false positive error. So this table here shows the results based on our expected cost function on the three algorithms. It takes some time to look at it and see. So as you can see in bold, the weighted logistic regression has the lowest expected cost with 216, and this is followed by the plain logistic regression with 343 expected costs. It is important to highlight that the overall accuracy for the plain logistic regression is 0.95, sorry, or 95%, and is slightly more accurate than the weighted variant. But remember, we are aiming to reduce overall cost by reducing the number of false negatives, as it has a higher cost to the business. This is why even though the model is slightly more accurate, the expected cost is significantly higher. So in the end, the weighted logistic regression is the one that is the most performant under expected cost. One other thing to note is that, as you can see, the weighted logistic regression using Smooth had the highest recall, 1. Now, for it to have the highest recall, it means that it picked up all the cases that were considered fraudulent, but it did so while flagging a lot of cases where there was no suspicion of fraud, hence the lower precision. So the weighted logistic regression balances, or better balances, the precision and recall, which leads to a much lower cost. So that's why the expected cost of the weighted logistic regression is less than half of the expected cost of the weighted logistic regression using Smooth. Our solution was implemented in the day-to-day running of the business. So it's currently being used. So when new claims are submitted, our algorithm determines if it is suspicious and if it should be further investigated using all the above we spoke about. So the claims that are predicted as fraud, or well, suspicious, are currently being investigated and looked at in real time. So for future work, what can be done on this? So we aim to improve model performance over time. So as more claims are labeled as fraudulent, we can also we get a better idea of the expected cost and improve accuracy. We can also spend more time adjusting and weighing all indicators individually. Certain indicators may have a higher likelihood of being fraudulent activity. Like, so for example, in the previous indicator, if an incident occurred between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m., that might be able to be weighted less because the uh, accidents that occurred during that time could just simply be because it being late at night and people are tired. Um, Furthermore, we can evaluate model outputs using other approaches and varying the cost function that we have. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for taking time to listen to me today.
Okay, so that's Navin's presentation. He's not here to answer questions, but um, potentially I could answer if you have any questions. This is a good example of work. He did this work for his MSc thesis, so he was able to use it for his thesis. He also got a publication out of it, and it's something he actually, they actually used in his job as well. Also, it kind of demonstrates some of the overlap we have. So this cost benefit analysis he did is based on some work that Shellyan has been doing for her PhD. One thing we didn't apply is that algorithm I mentioned earlier, this what we call the kappa algorithm, can be applied to anomaly detection as well. But in this particular case, we didn't do that, at least yet. Hopefully in the future we could. Okay, so let's go on to the final presentation for the morning session. So this is a slightly different format as well. So let me just bring this up. So this is by Shannon Ray, and she's actually a student or was a student at UTT, MSc student. But again, TTLAB is open to anybody who's interested in research. So it's not only UE students involved. As you saw, Ramnik is at Korea University and etc.
Good day, my name is Shannon Ray Hackett, and I recently completed my master's program in energy engineering.
Just checking if people can hear. Yeah, okay, great.
With specialization in renewable energy. And so this paper would have come as a result of my capstone project for that program. And my paper was based on predicting the residential, economic, photovoltaic potential in Trinidad and Tobago using data science. And it was supervised by Professor Hussein of the University of the West Indies and Professor Boudlal of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. So just a quick overview on my presentation. I will first talk about my motivation behind the project, the background and problem statement. Next, I'll go over my approach, which was guided by my literature review. Then I'll go through my results of the model as well. And then finally, I will provide my conclusions, my limitations, and provide options for future work. So first, to look at the motivation behind the project, shifting to a less fossil fuel dependent energy economy drives sustainable development, which as we know is the foundation of today's policymaking. But in order to ensure that this transition is indeed sustainable, we need to ensure that we are thinking of the more vulnerable members of society, especially when thinking about it in the context of electricity generation in Trinidad and Tobago. Because we have such a low cost of electricity, we need to ensure that renewable energy is indeed financially feasible option for all members of society, or to see what the limits are on that being an option. So this study introduces a model for stakeholders who can be power producers, solar companies, and us, the end users even, to guide our decisions on the future of solar energy deployment in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to photovoltaic energy. Firstly, I want to give an overview of the PV energy scenario in Trinidad and Tobago. So we do have a lot of pilot projects on small residential systems as it relates to renewable energy technologies. PV energy is particularly popular in Trinidad and Tobago, as we would have seen on the previous slide. We also have the solar powered gas station as well as the BP light source projects. My research question was how much demand charge savings can a consumer achieve via net metering and PV residential electricity generation in Trinidad and Tobago? And I had three major objectives, the first of which was to utilize data science principles for PV potential assessment. I also wanted to assess the economic potential for residential PV generation in Trinidad and Tobago. And lastly, I wanted to identify some of the challenges faced locally by the integration of renewable energy technologies. I want to now take a closer look at my approach, which included my literature review as well as development of my methodology. So looking at my literature review, first I would have looked at the solar PV potential, which can be broken down into four subcategories, the first being the physical potential, and this would account for the meteorological conditions such as the daily insolation and other weather conditions. Next would be the geographic potential, which is as a result of the extrinsic conditions of the site, such as whether the panels are installed on a roof or stand alone, or if there are lots of tall buildings or trees surrounding, stuff like that. Next would be the technical potential, which is based on the panel itself, what kind of cells were used to make the panel, and what are the associated efficiencies of those cells. And lastly would be the economic potential, which is again relevant in the case of Trinidad and Tobago because it can be affected by things such as the local cost of electricity. Next, I would have looked at market trends for PV systems, and I would have seen that there is a projected compound annual growth rate of 13.78% for the period 2019 to 2027, and that the price of solar energy systems has seen a steady decrease since 2008. Next, I would have looked at modeling energy systems. Of course, they can be modeled using energy engineering first principles and basic statistical methods, as well as they can be modeled using proprietary software such as the Homer Pro software. And lastly, it can be modeled using open source modeling, such as those tools that are provided by NREL, or even, as you will see later on in this project, tools that you can use via Python. And lastly, I would have looked at applications of data science and machine learning as it relates to energy, and I would have seen studies on consumption prediction, system control and optimization, site potential assessment using computer vision, and lastly, a financial feasibility analysis. So looking at my methodology now, my first step was to obtain data. I had a lot of challenges with this step, but eventually what I ended up doing was obtaining daily and bi-monthly consumption data from the TNSEC website via a survey. So participants of the survey were required to log on to their TNSEC account and download that information. Now, on the TNSEC website, you do have daily consumption data, but it only goes back 2 to 3 months, which wasn't really enough, whereas the bi-monthly consumption data goes back about 2 to 3 years. So this was the motivation behind developing the daily consumption estimation model, which was my second step and was done using machine learning. My third step was then to develop the model which would actually calculate the savings achievable for PV systems of different sizes. And then lastly, I would have visualized and interpreted my results. So my first step in my method was, of course, to estimate the daily electricity use from bimonthly data. I would have done this by firstly carrying out an exploratory data analysis of the household samples I collected, and then I would have tested some machine learning algorithms, selected the best model, and then utilized this model to predict the daily consumption for the remaining samples. So I want to look now at my results. On this first slide, I have the distribution of the daily electricity usage of 3 sample households. So we can see the first household had a kind of median average by monthly usage as compared to the other 2 samples, and that is reflected in the graph where they had a kind of average usage for most of the days. The second sample had obviously had more periods of higher electricity usage, and the last sample had the lowest amount of energy usage. So it just goes to show what a wide variation of usage we have. Using that data that I would have collected, I then tested my machine learning models. I tested 4 of them and I scored them using the relative mean squared error. And this is the mean squared error as compared to the mean squared error that would be obtained if I just use the average daily consumption over all the samples. And from this, we can see that the ridge regression and the extra regression performed the best because they had the closest relative mean squared errors to 1. Looking more closely at the models, looking at the learning curve, I would have seen that the ridge regression model did perform slightly better as the extra regression model seemed to have overfit just a little bit, and this was reflected by the actual values plotted. As you can see, the actual values are in green here and the estimated values are in yellow. And so the models do perform quite similarly, but I just decided to go with the ridge regression model. Now we can actually look at the modeling of the PV systems. For my data sources, I would have used the daily consumption model and used the results of that as previously described. I would have also used typical meteorological year data from NREL, which is a data set which, as the name states, it is a typical weather data for a given year for a particular period based on data that they would have collected for several years prior. I also use data from the National Solar Radiation Database by NREL, which gives you the solar data for a particular area. And lastly, I would have used the expertise of local solar energy companies. Looking now at how the model actually works, the user is first prompted to upload bi-monthly data from which their daily consumption is estimated. And of course, as I previously described, this data can be obtained by anyone with a TNTech account from their website. Next, the weather data is pulled from an existing database for the period of the user's data. Next, I used PVlib, which is a Python library, to determine the hourly and daily production for each system size. Of course, it is just an estimate. Next, I would have calculated the grid demand charge using the usage tiers from TNTech, so our local electricity prices. I would have incorporated that into the model. Lastly, I would have calculated the amount of savings that the user can achieve based on different PV system sizes. And lastly, I would have done some visualizations. I wanted to give an example of what the results look like practically. So on your left, you would see an actual bill of one of the samples that I would have used in developing this model, as well as the results from the model on the right in terms of how much demand charge a consumer would get based on the size of PV system that they have, with grid demand charge representing no PV system. So we can see that the actual demand charge for this customer was about $700, whereas the estimated demand charge was around 500. And so this error rate of about 0.27 could be attributed to the estimations made regarding the daily consumption rates. And as I will talk about in a second, this is one of the major limitations of the study. Looking more directly at the limitations and assumptions, first I'll start with the limitations, the first one being accessibility. Because the model is built using TTLAB, it means that a lot of people won't be able to use it as is. Next is the time frame. Samples must have at least 2 bi-monthly consumption periods from 2018 or sooner. And lastly, with respect to the data, of course, collecting more daily and even hourly data will improve the performance of the model and the estimations of how much savings you could actually achieve. And as far as the assumptions go, the daily consumption from the previous year for the same period was assumed to be in the same proportion to the bi-monthly consumption of the current year. As far as developing the hourly consumption patterns, a typical residential load profile was used from literature. And lastly, of course, there is some level of assumption when using the NREL typical meteorological year data. For as far as who can use this model, as I would have mentioned earlier, individual consumers can use this model if they themselves want to install a solar system and they just want to have like a rough idea of how much they could potentially save, as well as power producing companies and solar companies can use this model in the event that they want to either introduce net metering, which could be a future first here in Trinidad and Tobago, or in the case of solar companies, they can have it as a feature on their website in an attempt to motivate customers to have a PV system as well as a grid tied system. Of course, that is when net metering becomes available to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. Closely linked to my limitations and assumptions are my recommendations. So firstly, of course, we would need to collect more residential electricity consumption data in Trinidad and Tobago. This, I think, would greatly help the model to be more accurate, as well as adding other socioeconomic features such as the number of persons and the lifestyle of persons living in a house, capital costs, things like that, any grant subsidies that may be awarded for the use of renewable energy resources. All of these things will have an effect on the economic potential of a given photovoltaic system. Lastly, hosting of the model on a website or application would make it way more accessible as well as user-friendly. So to conclude, despite our limitations, we would have modeled the PV system using machine learning principles as well as the PVLib Python library, and we would have identified barriers to the integration of renewable energy technologies in Trinidad and Tobago, such as the low cost of electricity and the availability of data, even from the TNTech website. And so further recommendations, further work will include collecting more consumption data as well as refining the model and possibly having it be as a web application to improve the accessibility. And lastly, these were some of the references that I would have used while I was doing my project. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I have my email address here, as well as you can find me on LinkedIn if you have any further questions.
Okay, so that was Shanri. Unfortunately, she can't, she's not here to answer questions. she's an interesting example as well of people coming into TTLAB. She first came in, because she was doing her MSc in renewable energy. But by working with us, she got interested in data science and she picked up quite a few things in data science. And then she got an internship, through TTLAB as well with FCIB. And now she's working with FCIB as a data scientist. So, it just goes to show that it is possible to switch fields as long as you're willing to work towards it. So yeah, another interesting example. So we will take a break. We didn't do too badly on time. It's now 10 after 12 Trinidad time. We will take a break until 1 p.m. Trinidad time, when we'll start back for the afternoon session, and where we'll have some, more interesting, additional interesting presentations as well. Before we, well, I'll leave the Zoom session up, in case you want to just stay online, but otherwise feel free to drop off and rejoin at 1 p.m. But before you leave, any questions on anything I could answer on any of the presentations? I was involved in well, most of them, but well, actually all of them. So if you have any questions, I potentially could answer them. Okay, so let me stop recording and